I have an awesome interview with Trevor Francis, founder and CEO of 46 Labs. He's got a super cool background helping folks get internet connectivity in Central America, South America, West Africa, and now his company 46 Labs focuses on that in the United States. We talk about his company, we talk about being a pilot, and so many other fun things. You guys will love this conversation. Thanks, y'all. Take care. Yeah, National's awesome. I think, Austin is interesting. I think the food is a little bit better in Austin compared to Nashville for my personal tastes. But I think in terms of live music, in terms of, I think just the natural geography of Tennessee, mountains and valleys and really the lush areas, like farmland, even if you like gardening, it's great. So yeah, Tennessee's awesome.
It's a lot greener than Austin is, for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Although they have that cool river, right in the middle of the city.
They do. Yeah.
Have you gone kayaking down that? Surely you have when you moved.
Yeah, I have. So I used to, our family, we used to kind of walk along the river, and Austin's changed quite a bit since we've lived there, but it's still a great place. It's in a great state, and we're headquartered in Dallas, so I have to say that Texas is a fantastic place to do business, as Tennessee is as well. So two pretty hot places.
Texas and Florida are pretty prime for sure.
They are.
Tennessee is great. I think it's interesting. I mean, we're kind of equidistant, from both, and I think with the pandemic, it seemed like most of the Southeast got a huge lift in population.
It did. And well, so we moved here to be around family. We have a sick family member that we needed to kind of take care of, and we moved from Florida, actually, just like kind of everybody else though. It's that the Southeast has done really well. Tennessee's done fantastic. Nashville's great because it has all the seasons where you don't really have that in Texas or Florida.
Yeah, you get to plant some interesting veggies and fruit. So I have some grapes in my front yard, and it's funny. One of our board members is making fun of me. He's like, I don't know if Tennessee's made for wine, but we'll see. I'm optimistic.
You can grow wine everywhere. That's funny. Yeah,
that's damn true. So I'm curious about your background. So you lived in Texas, and the company's headquartered there, in Florida as well. Maybe you just kind of walk us through your career arc and kind of how you ended up in Oklahoma.
Sure. So this is the third time I've returned to Oklahoma, actually. So I was born in Florida, raised in Dallas, and got a scholarship to go to school in Oklahoma. So I took that. So I didn't have to burden my parents with, huge amounts of student loans, or myself for that matter. And actually ended up dropping out of that university to found a company, and did fairly well with that company. It was a consulting firm. Ended up transferring to a school in Boston, lived in Boston for a little bit, and so Florida, Boston. We lived in Boulder for a little bit. So we've been digital nomads in many cases, trying out different cities and different lifestyles. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's cool. It's a modest way to say you went to Harvard. That's cool.
Oh, well, you don't normally say that. It's the first thing they teach you to not say. So,
yeah, interesting. So you dropped out of undergrad initially. Were you just kind of compelled to start a business? What was the thinking?
I was bored. Yeah, I was bored. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it. I had started something in college and kind of got bored with the course load. So I figured I'd give that a shot. And my goal in college was to go out and find a job, but I kind of created a job, and kind of the rest is history.
Do you have kids?
I do. I have two boys, so a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Okay. What's your opinion on them going to college?
That's a good question. So we talked about that a lot. Both my parents went to college, but they didn't go to, huge schools, not Ivy League schools.
Yep.
And, my wife went to college where, we're very pro college. I think college is changing. I mean, it's changing a lot actually, even as recent as last week, right?
Yes.
With the Supreme Court decision. So, and we homeschool. So we're, both of our boys have always been homeschooled. So it's, we have probably a non-traditional view of education, but at the end of the day, we want a place for them to continue learning how to learn. And, I think that's a big thing that, maybe college has lost sight of. Certain colleges, maybe not all colleges, but certain colleges have lost sight of that. And hopefully it returns. I have very positive things to say about both the universities I attended. So but they're no place is perfect, right? And I think college is certainly I don't think you have to graduate necessarily, but I think that it's a good experience for anybody if you can afford to do it.
Yeah, totally. I'm always like fascinated by like the sort of learning and education that you receive, like building a company, not just about like how the world works, but how to think. And I wish you could like bottle that in a way and just give it to people.
I'm a recovering engineer, so the whole emotional intelligence thing that comes with operating a company and being a boss is that's a daily pursuit, right? And the culture changes, and it's certainly changed even through my tenure here at 46 Labs quite a bit in the last 10 years. So we've seen huge change, both with being able to recruit and retain talent, and just what folks expect today versus what they expected when I started the company. So yes, bottling it up, you can't. There's not enough legal pads here that I can use to kind of write down all of the lessons you learn on a daily basis. So I agree. It's no, you can't be. This is a completely different type of education. So,
do you think you'll encourage your children to be entrepreneurs and to start companies?
I think that it's not for everybody, right? So, I would encourage them to do whatever they're passionate about. My 9-year-old wants to be a concert pianist. He wants to play in Carnegie Hall, and that's his goal in life, right? So, does he want to have to make all the difficult decisions you have to make as a boss and owning a company and running out of money? No, I don't know if that's for everybody, right? So it's it's not for the faint of heart. But there are some of us who are kind of built this way and would be bored otherwise. So that's
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Encourage that, yes. I think we'd definitely encourage them to go whatever direction they want to go.
So 46 Labs. How'd you kind of start the business? Was there like an aha moment, or just give us some background on your company.
Well, so kind of come out of the international space. So once I did my whole college thing, I went and started founding companies that focused on solving international problems. I've always done digital infrastructure for the most part, and kind of back to the not wanting to be bored. I started in developing countries, so in West Africa and Central America and places like that. Right. So I recognized that there were a lot of the challenges that we were solving for these out of incumbent operators in these countries that were very relevant to domestic companies or even companies that had more resources than a lot of these companies did. So when I founded the company, it was kind of a core principle. First principle was how can we help folks do more with less?
I mean, many years ago, this is like over like a decade ago, but I lived in China, in Shanghai, and there's a certain I don't know, like personality type of like an expatriate, and the type of things that expats are into and the type of risks that we take professionally, so that
Sure.
really resonates with me. So that's awesome. So what were some of the problems that you saw in terms of just maybe broad brush connectivity problems for these folks in developing countries?
Most of my work was done in Central America and Africa. So you had historically populations that didn't have a huge amount of income, right? And which
Well,
when you have that, it drives the businesses that support them, right? So, if you have $1 to invest that you're getting from your customer, you have to turn a profit from that, right? And they had a lot of the operators that we worked with had a lot of challenges with kind of understanding how to make the most of their networks and both reach their customers better in a more resilient way, and then also interconnect to the rest of the world in a more resilient way. So the problems that I historically solved were around kind of those core tenets. In Central America, my focus was in rural areas, specifically Honduras. And Honduras it's a little bit, I guess it's a little bit like Tennessee in the case of there's a lot of hills and there's a lot of trees, and granted more rainforest focused, but you struggle with that when you're trying to trench and lay fiber, right? Or trench and do copper. So they solved or attempted to solve that using kind of the precursor to cellular networks that were CDMA radio phones. I helped kind of improve how rural areas of Colombia were able to connect to the rest of the world. So that's where, that's kind of where I started. Did that in Colombia as well. I definitely hung off the side of multiple towers,
wow.
in the rainforest and the jungles. So that was, not for the faint of heart for sure. We had, the exact same issues happened in West Africa, except not quite as densely forested, but certainly a very unique demographic of people consuming telecom.
What's like the business climate? Let's just take, for example, Colombia, because probably it varies from Colombia to parts of West Africa. Like who are the different like stakeholders if you're laying down like pipe in Colombia? Like you have government, private enterprise, the rural constituents. Like how does it work?
That's right. So, most of these countries kind of operate in this kind of, in West Africa, most of them were government-run entities, and then kind of over time they shifted, they were privatized. And for the most part, most developing countries are that way. They, a lot of them still kind of operate as this quasi-public-private type of entity in the countries. So, and specifically in Colombia, where I got involved there was huge amounts of copper. This was during the great, GFC, and people were going up and taking these giant bundles of copper and chopping them down, these phone lines, these huge phone lines, because they could strip the wires and sell the copper, basically black market. So huge sections of Colombia were essentially going offline because people were stealing the copper, right? And they'd steal the copper out. Yeah, it's just crazy, right? So people would get electrocuted doing it. It was a really, really bad deal, right? So we had to figure out, okay, when you've got huge swaths of populations going offline, how do you get them back online, right? So, and doing so wirelessly and whatnot. So it's you still have that. You have that today, even today, still happening in places like Nigeria, where folks are taking transformers, like electric transformers, and ripping them out of the ground and using the oil in the transformers to cook food. So it's really not great, right? So, figuring out how to build resilient infrastructures that, stood up to that level of that culture that exists there, right?
That's insane. So I remember in China, like people would, if you go to a street food vendor, they probably got the oil from the sewer at some point.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing in China. You just cook the oil, you get all this stuff out. That's so interesting. So, okay. So does that like improve over time? Like theoretically, as an economy develops, they're like not taking down transformers to get the oil, or is that just that thing that's a risk management thing that's there?
Well, it's really funny, right? So, if you look at Africa as and obviously it's a massive continent, so trying to generalize it, but working in the places that I've worked, you may not necessarily have power at your home, but everybody has a cell phone, right? So communications at the end of the day is the lifeblood for these folks. And in general, I think the tide has shifted a little bit because people don't want to lose access to TikTok or to whatever, right? Or to be able to call their mother or whatever, right? That trumps having reliable power in their house, right? So but that's the culture there now.
Yeah, there's this one dude on TikTok that I see. He's somewhere in Africa, and he's got like a sick cave or something with like all this electronics and like a sick car, and people are like, "Is this real? Like, how do you have all this stuff?" Anyways, that's so funny. So like the social media addiction is like permeating parts of the developing world, and that's creating
That's right. And people still talk on the phones, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's still, probably the most efficient form of communication. You can take it everywhere with you. So, obviously we're very bullish on communications and on connectivity in general, being that that's our business. But, you remove that and the world goes back to the century. So
were you already did you already start 46 Labs before going to Central America, South America, West Africa, or?
So 46 Labs is kind of my re-entry back into the United States, right? So, after learning a lot of lessons internationally and having some really great success and some not so great success, I realized that the same challenges were being faced here in the States, but with bigger budgets and, frankly, bigger problems to solve, because you had more people who were consuming, greater quantities of connectivity. So both on the business side and on the consumer side.
So when did you decide to kind of move back to the U.S. And start 46 Labs? Was that like at the same time, or did you kind of start your family and then we're like, hey, this is probably a better opportunity here?
Yeah, I started my family. We had, I founded the company essentially, right. Let me think about that. My wife will probably get angry with me if I actually get the date wrong, but, essentially a year-ish after, our first son was born. So, at some point being a parent is trumps other things, right? You have to make, decisions, right? And prioritize your life. So that's, not saying that it wasn't the right decision, and that precipitated it, the need precipitated it. That's just kind of how this string of events came together.
Do you miss kind of being like sort of in the developing world and all of the risk and chaos that comes with it? Or are you like settled and happy?
We homeschool kids, right? So it's just a different version of chaos and craziness, right? So we're a fairly nomadic family. So it's, I think that's probably born out of, a mutual shared boredom that my wife and I have, and our kids have figured out how to jibe with that, right? We, I guess 2 years ago, we traveled the country in an Airstream, and they got to see some things that cool. I certainly never got to see growing up in a master plan community with both parents worked, and there wasn't time to do that, right? So it's we've kind of designed this unique life that's probably not for everybody, but
that's cool. What was like your favorite place that you saw that you didn't see kind of growing up?
Well, the West, right? I grew up in Texas, and we basically stopped at Colorado. That was as far as you would go, right? It wasn't until much later that I got to go to California and places like that. I really love probably the greatest state from a nature perspective is Montana. So we, everybody we've in our family just gushes over Montana. It's just gorgeous. So.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, through the pandemic, we were making our way through, like we hit Colorado, Utah, and going to Jackson Hole in 2 weeks. First time to Wyoming. Very pumped about that. Haven't yet made it to Montana. But yeah. Do you like Jackson?
Jackson's great. It was super. We did the same thing. It was during the pandemic. Yeah. It was still pretty open, right? The rest of the West pretty much wasn't, but at that time, but Jackson was open, and it was busy, right? Because everybody was doing the same thing we were doing, right? So it was like, I've got to get out of here, and I need to, I want to see. This is a good time to see things. So, and I think it was great for America in general. It's just there wasn't that catalyst that caused people to like explore, right? Yeah, it used to be you explore kind of your neighborhood bar, and that was as far as you explored, right? And then, but now it kind of drove people you know, to see the world, I guess.
Oh, totally. And there's so much natural wonder in our country and in North America in general, and I think it gets overlooked for like the European vacation or the Asian, trip or something. But like, yeah, especially, I mean, west probably of Illinois and like really east of, I guess, the Pacific is like so much beauty. And I think like the national park system came up with the permitting system because of the volume of national park visitors. Like all these top trails now have lottery permits that you have to win to be able to hike. So
you do.
It's
and it's a lot. And it's I would have never, had it not been for the pandemic, I would have never explored the part of the country that you're in. There's never a reason for me to be in Tennessee or North Carolina, where Angela's from. They are hands down, especially the Blue Ridge Mountains in the area, kind of in southwest part of North Carolina and all the way up to Sevierville and all that, and Tennessee. It's just, it's unbelievable. And the waterfalls and all the things that you would expect to see in Costa Rica and Hawaii, they're there, right? And you would never stumble upon.
I think actually East Tennessee and like parts of North Carolina, it has the most like density of reptiles. That's what I remember seeing of any part of the world, like all types of lizards and all that stuff. So yeah, it's beautiful. And I wish that I had grown up seeing some of this stuff, because you're just kind of, I like my parents, they're immigrants. It's like, we don't really go out to nature. You just kind of like study it, you go to bed and you do it next day.
Yeah. Well, now trust me, I completely understand. I think in general, nature makes people better humans. And I think that it would, obviously I'm super privileged to be able to say that I've been able to do this, right? But I think, I'm in Oklahoma, right? It's not a place known for nature, right? But it's everywhere if you look for it. So I think everybody should be encouraged to go outside.
Oh, totally.
Even if it's 103 degrees out. So,
so pardon my ignorance, is it basically just kind of flat plains where you are, or is it farmland?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's both, right? So Oklahoma, if you kind of divided it right down the center and you go west, it's nothing, right? And I hate to say that. There's some really neat places, right? But as far as from a topography standpoint, it's very flat. It's very windy, and there's a lot of farmland. And you keep taking it west through New Mexico, and it all somewhat looks the same, right? You go to essentially the right half, or the eastern half of the state, and it's green and there's trees. And as you get closer to Arkansas, there becomes more hills and things like that. So it's a fairly diverse state.
To what extent does like the topography of a given region affect connectivity? Like, how does it work, like for satellites and like GPS on your Apple Watch?
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. From a connectivity standpoint, it's a lot easier to beam a connection through a brick wall than it is to do it through a tree. So, and most people don't really, kind of understand that from a either line of sight or non-line of sight basis, right? So you're either consuming connectivity that's dug through the ground, right? So if there's any rock in the mountains or hills or anything like that, it makes it 10 times as hard and 10 times as expensive to do it, right? If you're doing line of sight, so if you have, let's say, a wireless antenna on your roof and you're pointing it towards an ISP that is providing internet service, you have to have line of sight or near line of sight, otherwise it doesn't work, right? And then you have cellular carriers who are going 5G and whatnot, which is a huge deal. I mean, I'm talking to you over 5G right now. So it's come a long way. And I also have a Starlink on my roof. So in case this doesn't work. So there's a lot of options that have kind of come about in the last couple of years that have somewhat democratized connectivity that flattens all of that topography and makes it more accessible for rural Americans, I guess. or we're people globally, right? With Starlink, you can be rolling around on a bike, or you not carrying it, but you could be on a boat in the middle of the ocean and still have great, internet connectivity. And that wasn't possible, really, for Starlink.
What do you think the future of like connectivity is? I mean, do you think that everybody, I mean, I guess so, everybody in the world will have a cell phone and be connected to the internet?
Yeah, there's huge swaths of the United States that you can't get connectivity at right now. So, and it's surprising, you hear the advertisements about mobile operators having 99% coverage and, of the population, right? But that's kind of it's a deceiving figure, because when you are at a campground and we're in Montana, or you're in North Dakota or South Dakota, or you're in these huge swaths of land where there's not a huge population center, but there is people who live out there, very much underserved from a connectivity perspective. So, you've got the government currently right now, which is investing billions and billions of dollars in infrastructure funding to be able to gain access for specifically fiber for the most part, to a lot of those towns. And kind of the rest is picked up from 5G and low Earth orbit connectivity solutions like Starlink.
What's happening like when you go to the Smokies and you're like on a trail and you're not getting any service and you have to use like one of these Garmin sat phones if you get stuck or so? Like, why is my cell phone not?
Well, it's good. It's a good question. So cell phones in general and cell phone towers are just waves, right? They're beamed in specific sectors or directions, right? And if there's not coverage there from an operator, you can't embed. It doesn't get embedded. It has to be pointed somewhere, right? You have to have access to that, right? So if you're on the backside of a mountain, pretty much can't beam cell right through the mountain. It just doesn't work that way. And these are all microwaves, right? So they're, well, for the most part, microwaves, radio waves, same thing. But you have to gain access to it, right? So when you are on a trail in the Smokies and you can't, you're not able to get it, satellite and unless you're carrying a Starlink with you, that's pretty much the only option you have. And you have to have a full view of the Starlink. You have to have a full view of the sky, which is, as you know, in most places in the East is almost impossible because of the trees, right?
Yes, they are a beautiful nuisance sometimes. So I guess you need to have visibility of a cell tower, basically, or a clear line of sight to one for the cell phone to work on a mountain, or I'm not understanding that properly.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's why you see cell towers perched on the top of mountains. They can cover and get huge coverage swaths by doing that, right? They're not pretty to look at. They're necessary if you want to serve people in those areas.
Gotcha. Just as an example, like you ascend to the top of pick a mountain in Colorado, and like there's a lot of exposure, there's no tree line, but you're also not getting service there. Is that a cell coverage issue, or is that just...
It is. When they're building out their cell networks, they're actually pointing their antennas downward, not upward.
Gotcha. Okay. So even if you have line of sight, it's not able to hit the actual tower. You'd have to just have like a Starlink basically to get internet. Okay.
Yeah. Everything. It's like, think about like drawing a line between the cell tower and where you are, right? If you can't see the cell tower, it can't see you. And, obviously for mobile, that's how it works.
Like in terms of opportunity, is there like a commercial opportunity then, like around national parks and around like these areas that are not like, I guess, dense in terms of residential population?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, certainly it's an underserved market, but, the consumer in that, in that space isn't super excited about getting a separate service just to wander on the trail, right? So, at the end of the day, you have to be economically viable, otherwise you won't survive in that case. So, Yellowstone was a good example, especially we went to Yellowstone, obviously during COVID as well. And when you've got as many people who are going into Yellowstone, the base equipment, even for the cell providers that are there, just isn't big enough to handle that level of connectivity. right? They engineer them, dimension them for anticipated loads, kind of like stadiums, right? But if they happen to have 10 times the amount of people there on a normal time, you're not able to handle that. So I think that certainly getting access to connectivity in general, the wireless providers, the fiber providers, and Starlink are doing a lot to be able to gain access to connectivity for everybody, not just here in the States, but globally, which kind of creates this other issue, which is kind of how do you manage all of that, because it's pretty sizable when you're now kind of extending the total reachable audience for this connectivity stuff, and how do you manage that as a service provider? How do you consume that as a business?
Right.
There's a whole lot of things you don't necessarily think about anymore, you didn't think about before, but you have to think about now.
What are some of like the market opportunities maybe in the U.S. just around underserved communities for connectivity that you guys see in front of you?
They're kind of being gobbled up on a weekly basis right now with the amount of funding that's the tens of billions of dollars that are going from the infrastructure bill that was passed into private corporations to build out fiber networks. You're getting the right type of attention from private industry, because you're backing it with public dollars to be able to extend that reach. So that space is extremely hot right now, both from raising money. It's fairly easy to raise money for that right now, whereas the rest of startup land is not easy to raise money right now from an equity perspective. But they're able, you're getting a lot of attention from private equity firms, from VC firms, and from kind of vendor financing opportunities, because they know that essentially their investment is de-risked by the U.S. government kind of ponying up a majority of the cash to be able to do this work.
So it'd be like taking a community that maybe does not have fiber access and putting fiber down. Okay, gotcha. That's cool. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Is there data on what, like the difference in maybe like economic productivity from a city that is fiber equipped versus like non-fiber equipped?
Absolutely. So obviously I can't quote it right now because I don't have it in front of me, but the dynamics are significant, right? And it also allows people to either go home, like let's say you grew up in a rural part of the country and you wanted to return home to take care of your family or to live a different life than what you would live in a big city, right? Technology and connectivity has prevented that from happening until recently, right? So, or if you've been through the pandemic, and you're like, I'm not doing that again. I want to go out and I want to live on 80 acres and raise llamas, but I still also want to be a network engineer, right? I have some friends who've done that specific thing. Yeah, they can do that now.
That's cool. No, I mean, this is just like my personal anecdote, but I have fiber and we live on 2 acres, basically like in west of Nashville, and my internet's better than it was 10 years ago. Like I went to BU in Boston, living in the dorm that I think was, I don't know, we had like a T1 line, I think, for the dorm.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm like, This is way...
Yeah, for sure. And they're doing a great job. The fiber providers and the rural providers who are out there are doing a fantastic job of making it possible for people to choose different lives than, maybe the way they grew up, right?
That's a really neat story. I mean, there was a big emphasis on fiber connectivity in Chattanooga, which is an eastern town, as you know, in Tennessee. I think there was one Sprint like this in Kansas City. To what extent do you think that creates like an incentive for people to move to a given city for remote work if there is fiber there?
Depends on the demographic, right? So if you're a younger demographic, I think that's the first you ask, right? Is there internet there? Do I have reliable access to internet? If the answer is no, that's almost a deal breaker, right, for you, right? It could be the most beautiful, perfect piece of land or wherever, right? But if there's no internet, might as well be cut off from the grid.
Totally. I have like a controversial opinion. I think like broadband access is more important than public transportation. Like
I
it's
completely agree.
like
Yeah.
because you can just like you have everything then, and maybe you drive an hour to get some food, but that's it.
Well,
Like,
and I think that, I have to temper that response, right? With, obviously I'm in the connectivity business, so I'm biased from that perspective, right? And, obviously not everybody uses connectivity as regularly as people like you and I, right? So certain people have to get to work, right? Because they're not sitting in front of a computer all day, they're doing something else, right? So I think that's, at least for our demographic, and I think for the people who are digital workers, I think it is certainly as important as public, as public transportation, which by the way is not available in rural communities for the most part anyway.
yeah, actually, I think maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, we interviewed a guy. He runs a company that basically builds like smart valves if you're trying to water an orchard or like a vineyard. Basically, they drive around on ATVs and turn the valves on and off to like maintain, hydrated plants. And so this is all linked now via internet and Bluetooth.
IoT.
And so I feel like yeah. And so it's like, even there, that guy is like the farthest thing from like an information. I mean, I guess he has a tech company, but still, it's like he's dealing with folks that are using his tools to kind of go and build their farms, And so even there, it seems very important, extremely important for that thing to work.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that's a huge driver for a lot of people in rural communities is supporting the businesses that are supporting them, right? So when you're in rural Nebraska and you're on 1,000 acres and you're farming corn or you're farming wheat or and you've got these combines that are driving themselves based upon GPS and IoT mappings for what they're supposed to be doing and crop dusting and all of that stuff. All of it is now, well, a lot of it is now kind of driven by by smart applications, right? And that some of them rely on constant streams of connectivity and other ones don't, right? So it's kind of trying to juggle that. But in building that out to support the businesses, the residents of those communities get to take advantage of that. So I think that's sort of the pull. I think that is feasible to get connectivity in places that you would normally not be able to get.
So how did you get interested in connectivity? Like, did you study this in school or?
No, not at all. I studied finance. So, my first premise was, how am I going to make money? Right. And I kind of got dragged into connectivity. I studied finance, but I was always a software guy. And my first project was in Honduras. And I was hired as a consultant at a school to essentially solve an issue, and I was able to solve the issue. And I'm 22 years old, right? Just very I don't know anything, right? But I said I can do it, right? And managed to kind of pull it off. So it's then that the rest was history at that point. I was hooked. I was hooked for the international aspect of it, which I always wanted to travel growing up, and I was hooked by the need and the technology and meeting all, interesting people. And it was a good fit for me.
That's cool. Yeah. It like fulfills a lot of needs and the subject matter is super interesting. And there's like a huge wide open opportunity there. That's really cool. If you had to, like when you were, let's say 18, what did you think you would be doing after school?
Well, I semi-founded my first company at 16 and it was doing, IT and web development. So I thought that I was going to somewhat be in that space.
Gotcha.
But at the end of the day, I fly airplanes too for fun. So I was like, well, maybe I'll do aviation or maybe I'll do, something else. But I just got sucked back in.
How long have you been like an aviator?
So when I was in Oklahoma, I took it like his first semester of my sophomore year, there was an elective to you could fulfill one of your electives by being by taking pilots, your pilot's license, getting your pilot's license. So I kind of killed two birds with one stone on that and got hooked immediately from that point forward. And I've owned a few airplanes over the years. And I have the addiction. Hopefully it won't be the death of me, but aviation's fantastic.
No, I feel like you have a great personality disposition, like cool under pressure, like for flying planes,
Well, you're a CEO. You kind of have to be able to deal with guns pointed against your heads. But
for sure. Yeah, I've been maneuver. Yeah, totally. I wear this thing called like a whoop strap that like measures like your stress levels, and I like to see to see how my cognitive function is under different levels of stress. What do like the in crowd of pilot? Do you call yourselves pilots or aviators or interchangeable?
I mean, if you walked in and you're like, well, I'm a general aviator, I think that you would be immediately removed from the conversation at that point, right? So, the naval aviator, term works on TV, but not necessarily in the role of British pilots, right? So, pilots you talk about the craziest bunch of folks too. You would never expect to get together, and all walks of life and all matter of stories. So it's a very eclectic group of individuals.
Totally. I took a few lessons.
Did you? Okay.
Flew a little Cessna, for like your training course and stuff. It's sure. One of these things where like my interest space doesn't map with the available time I have in my life, unfortunately. But it's a thing on my that I want to pursue for sure. It's fun, and it's like, I mean, it teaches you a lot about yourself, and like you're forced to be extremely thorough, cool under pressure. It's really cool, and it's just like insane. You're like, how is this thing in the air right now? Like, what is happening?
You're like, I'm flying. Wow, and it's it's kind of anticlimactic when you actually take off for the first time yourself, because you're like, I'm literally flying. It doesn't feel any different. It's just that I'm flying. So, it's a unique experience that it's hard to describe. Yeah.
Oh my God. I remember the first time that the instructor's like letting you fly. I mean, this is probably a long time ago for you, like many hours ago, but like, I remember I was like, what, you're seriously just letting me do this? He's like, yeah, it's fine. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, okay, I'm going to try to do this. And I was like, it blew me away. It's a really,
I liken it to, it's funny. I liken it to when my first son was born, and, we took him home, and I'm like, so I have to, like, I'm taking him home now. Like, I have, like, what do I do now? Right. So I had a similar, it's the only thing I could say that it's somewhat likening to, especially when you first solo an airplane. It's like, I shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. Like, this is dangerous. Right. So
that's so true. I know. It's crazy. There's like, what's your view on like using, like, do you guys take family trips, flying or anything like that? Or is it more so just recreate? Okay.
Yeah, we used to. For me, it's been a great business tool, and I met some, I met some really neat people who have kind of helped me advance the company. A lot of them are entrepreneurs, recovering entrepreneurs that also fly. So, my kids love aviation too. My wife is, I guess, to some degree, will forever be warming to aviation. Probably never, never super excited about getting her pilot's license, but happy to let me fly around.
I was talking to a friend about this. It's crazy how much like easier it is to forge business relationships when you talk about things other than work.
It is.
It's just funny, and it's true.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that I love business, and I've always, done business, and I think there's obviously a lot to talk about from that perspective, and war stories and whatnot. But at the end of the day, your hobbies is kind of, to some degree, why you do a lot of this stuff, right? Obviously not to starve, to build, hopefully something for your, that your kids can, leverage at some point in the future, either leverage an exit or leverage the business that exists already. They feed other things, feeds other stuff, right?
Yeah, totally. I find that entrepreneurs tend to be like generally obsessive people. And I think like you just are going to naturally have interests outside of work, that you're excited about, you're passionate about, that you're good at as well.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I heard a story about, I think it was the Uber founder. He was like top 5 in the world at like Wii tennis or something
Oh
like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
It's really funny. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of, for the good CEOs, there's a bit of competitiveness that goes along with it. I think, probably that needs to be tempered maybe a little more. But in general, it's, an obsessive bunch.
Okay, so if you had to go back and maybe give your former self a couple bits of wisdom when you first started 46 Labs, what would they be?
Raise more money.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, we're a bootstrapped organization. That the sacrifices that my family made to start this, were real, right? And that's, and the childhoods that you somewhat sacrifice from your kids are real, right? So, and that goes back to kind of the entrepreneur's dilemma of, well, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense that you really have to understand that it is not a hobby. Like running a company, having folks who rely on you for their paychecks, having customers that rely on you to operate, to do what they do, right? To deliver your services so they can deliver their services is, it's a level of responsibility that not everybody fully, understands when they sign up for this thing, right? So I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I've kind of known it from the beginning, but even this one, 4 or 5 ventures later, I'd say, understand what you're getting into, understand it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take, and it's going to cost a lot more than you anticipate it's going to cost. And if you're cool with that, great, go for it. Have fun, right? That would be one or two things, I guess, and the other would be just don't take it so seriously.
Yes.
Sure, connecting businesses to the world is super important for me, right? But at the end of the day, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, right? And I obsess about this stuff, right? We want to make sure everybody is able to connect and do do it and save time but taking it and understanding it and encapsulating it as a problem to solve versus an identity is, you learn that late, I think, as an entrepreneur. And it for what it's worth, it makes you a better entrepreneur if you choose to serve your customers better, right? You're not encumbered by the emotional aspects that go with being with managing a business.
And I think actually things go better when you don't take it as seriously.
Yeah. I think that's true. And maybe many aspects of life probably exist that way. Right. So.
Oh man. Oh, totally. I mean, when we first started the company, like I was so obsessed with like every small thing. 'Cause you're like, if I don't do this, it's going to kill us,
Yeah.
And then, you're like, if we don't close this customer, we're dead. And obviously I'm using stronger language, like when I'm actually saying that, but
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like over time, you're like, does that really matter? Nah, I think it really doesn't. Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
It's real. I mean, it's true, right? It's not, you're not like overstating the situation, right? It's perspective's everything here. So.
Yeah, totally. So bootstrap company. Okay. So are you thinking that you guys are going to just like fund the company out of profits basically indefinitely, or do you sort of see it raise on your horizon?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've done a venture debt raise last year, the first meaningful raise from an institution, and that really was to kind of jumpstart our growth, which it's done. Then we'll probably look at maybe doing a our first proper, I wouldn't even call it a series. Saying a series A when you're 10 years old is kind of like silly, right? But yeah, but we're raising some growth capital. Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, somebody once told me like a long time ago, I was like, treat every point of equity like it's worth $10 million, and I see the virtue in that. You know,
you do, and it's painful. Gosh, it's
true.
painful to do that too, right? So, and the early equity is it's the most expensive. So,
yes, that's true. Yeah, we started. I mean, we founded the company January 28th, 2013, and we basically grew the company out of revenue until 2019. We took on like a very small safe note round from folks that sold their companies. And then just last August, we raised our first institutional round, which, I mean, we called it a Series A, but like you said, we've been operating for like 9 years at that point.
Sure.
And it's like, well, it's technically a Series A. Like when you file it with the SEC, it's like a Series A, that's what they call it. But it's just like, it's funny. You're just like, I don't know.
And you feel kind of sheepish. Yeah. Trust me. Yeah, I understand that, right? Because it doesn't fit the traditional model, and your growth didn't fit that either, right? So it's and I think that's the other thing you were talking about. Your going back to the things you would tell your prior self. If you look online and if you read and if you watch podcasts, it seems like there's a recipe that everybody's running but you, right? And and the reality is there's not a recipe. There's whatever you've managed to kind of put together and make work is the recipe, right? And because if you pay attention to the other noise, you'll think, I'm so far behind, I've done this wrong entirely. Why did I ever decide to take this path, right? Yeah, run your own race, and it's okay, right?
That's so valuable, and it's so true. And because like at least I will cycle on like, how does this fit into the broader narrative around raising money, and like how do we position this? You know, right? And it's like you're incentivized to do that, but like you're right. It's like it's kind of a waste. You just got to focus on your own thing, ride your own.
Yeah, you're thinking about enterprise. When you're running a business, it's hard to think about enterprise value and running and serving your customers at the same time, right? So it's it is, but you're taught to think that, right? And I think the other thing I'd say is that it's okay to question what other people are telling you, right? Because some of them are full of complete crap. So, that's question everything.
Oh, totally true. I mean, there have been, in our space in particular, there have been a couple of companies that raised like tremendous B rounds, like huge B rounds, like 12 months after their A. And then like you don't hear about them for like 5 years, and they're like, they sold to such and such company and not, and you're like, what? Like, how did they just burn $30 million or something? Like, where did it go? So you're right. It's like they may have over-indexed on EV and then sort of turned into nothing.
And their backers force them to do that in many cases too, right? So that's the other thing that is really kind of tough to understand, is that there's expectations that come with that money.
It's funny. Like everybody knows that's what's happening, and so like at least I feel like I have to be so judicious with every dollar, whether or not we're venture back, and treat it the same. Like treat it with the same sort of sanctity, as if there were 10 grand in the company coffers, like or something,
Yeah, no, and I think that's being a good steward is that's it's understated, or it has been. Lately, it's actually not been understated. Folks have had to figure out how to do more with less, right? That there's been a reckoning, I think, and I think that will continue as people burn through, more of what their races look like. But it's just good practice, and that's something they don't teach you in school, right? You can, they just don't, right? And being able to assess what you need when you need it. Right. And be very judicious with every dollar.
What are some like things or practices that you do to try to maintain your own kind of like, let's say, internally generated viewpoints versus like conforming to the broader conversation? Like, do you have any sort of centering practices, or do you turn off social media?
I have a wife. Yeah. So, And she's kind of lived this roller coaster with me. So, while I'd like to say that I have a lot of internal discipline in this, I am married, and my wife is very vocal with how she feels about things, which I think is certainly a gift. And going back to not taking yourself too seriously, I think that has a lot to do with this. It's just kind of, stepping back and saying, am I really being crazy here? Am I thinking about this the right way? Am I, just step back, right? Or go to nature and figure it out, on a run or on a hike or whatever, right? So,
well, thank you, Trevor. Really appreciate your time, man. Awesome conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Frontier Podcast powered by Gun.io. We drop 2 episodes per week, so if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and come hang out with us again next week and bring all your internet friends. If you have questions or recommendations, just shoot us a Twitter DM at The Frontier Pod, and we'll see you next week.
I'm going to hit record because I think this type of stuff actually helps. It helps just kind of humanize us. We're not faceless corporate overlords.
You don't know me very well yet.